probably these prairies the first time I saw them back doing the eryngii stuff.
So can you explain the rattlesnake master moth situation?
Well, they seem to be doing pretty well in the prairies of Missouri. Whatever type of management that they're doing seems to favor them, because in most of the places that I've looked, I've found them. They are fire sensitive, so they're generally not in a place that has been burned either in the fall or the spring, but they seem to readily move back in within the next year or two. I've been watching these now for several years. Populations go from Columbia, Missouri at Tucker Prairie, clear down to, I found them down at Diamond Grove by the Arkansas border. And a lot of the prairies down in that area, and then these here that I call the lower Sedalia prairies. It spends its entire life with the plant of Rattlesnake Master, Eryngium yuccifolium. The females in the fall will lay their eggs on leaf debris of the plant. Now, most things you will read will say they just spread them in the duff, and that's not true. They'll actually find a leaf stem that's kind of folded, and they'll tuck their eggs in the fold, and that's how they overwinter, and that's why they're so fire sensitive, because if you run a fire through it, burns all that up.
Okay.
And when they hatch out in the spring, they generally go up to the center of the plant and work down. They don't bore into the side. It's too tough a plant for them to do that, but they go down the leaf curls, and from doing that alone, they immediately are kind of unable to throw a flower stalk. If you find one in a plant that has one, it's probably moved out from another plant and done that. They don't typically, they're not able to put one up. They don't necessarily kill that plant. Usually the bulb will survive, and then further years it'll even bloom. But for that year it won't. They live in that the entire summer. They can start out with having 3 or 4 or 5 little larvae on the same plant, but as they get bigger, there's not enough room really for more than one, so they will either run off the other larvae. If they're smart, they'll take off and try to find something else to eat, or one will kill the other, and generally eat most of it. I've found that in some of the plants I've looked in. They'll just chew them up. Oftentimes too, ants will invade a hole that they find and eat the larva and take over that plant. It doesn't happen a lot. It seems like in a place where you've got that happening, you'll find several, but you either find none at all or you find it kind of prevalent in a certain area. But anyway, they go through the summer feeding in there. They feed until about the middle of August and grow, and then about that time they bore out of the plant, and they'll make a tube, the larva will, from wherever they're going to pupate up to the top of the ground. And they'll go back down into a chamber, usually an inch or 2 under the ground, and they'll pupate, usually for about 28 days, about 4 weeks. Then they'll hatch out as a moth and crawl up, and this is a very tiny little thing that they make, but it's enough that they can get out of the ground. It's always kind of amazed me that they don't tear all the scales off their wings crawling out, but they don't. And they come out, and then they'll hang on something and dry. And then this happens about, I've never reared one out any earlier than about the 20th of September. And usually after the first week of October, they're kind of waning off. They're very synchronized on how they hatch. And they seem to hatch about the same time their whole range. I mean, we know of it from northern Illinois clear down into Arkansas, and they still hatch about the same time. It's not like leaves turning, they don't gradually hatch out any different. It's always about the 20th of September, and by probably the 10th or 15th of October they're pretty well gone. They've done their thing. I have caught some at wine ropes, which are pieces of rope soaked in wine and brown sugar and hung up, and moths in the fall especially will come into that and feed. And once in a while you get usually a female at these wine ropes, but generally you don't find them like at flowers or anything. You don't normally get them very often, even in traps, light traps, like they usually put out for moths. They just tend not to be attracted too much to it. Other than the fact that I notice I get more if I put like a dark blue black light at the trap instead of like a bug zapper light blue light. You seem to get more, but it's not a good way to survey for them. They're not really very attracted to it.
So typically for the most part, they only will bore into the rattlesnake master. So they're sort of symbiotic with that plant.
Absolutely. In the hundreds and hundreds, maybe probably thousands of larvae that I've seen over the entire range, 2 times I have found it not in an Eryngium plant, and that's probably because the plant died or they moved out and they couldn't find one. And one of them was in a plant that I call Cacalia. It's some kind of Indian plantain, which I also call the universal donor of Papaipemas, because you never know which one you're going to find in there, because almost any of them will eat it, as particular as they are. I found one in that one time, and one time I reared one out of Baptisia, which was adjacent to a plant that I think it moved over for, and for whatever reason it took it. The larvae seem to be much less particular about what they eat than the females are about where they lay their eggs. They stick to a plant and they don't vary from it very much. The caterpillars, when they're young, seem to need that particular plant, but as they grow, and they don't have to get too awfully big, I've learned that I can take any species there is of the 50 or around 50 that there are, and drill a hole in a carrot and stick the caterpillar in there, and he'll do fine. Once you start seeing him pooping, he's took it and he's going to do okay in it.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a great while you'll get a larva that just doesn't want to take it, but 99% of the time they will.
Okay.
Very easy to rear out.
So are we looking for a rattlesnake master in this field?
Yes, we are, and I don't know if they're here.
I don't see any, but maybe those guys out there found something. Should we head out over there?
Yeah, there'd just be some little ones too. So.
And what did you say your name was again? What?
My name's
Yeah.
Jim Wiker.
Jim Wiker. And so you study entomology, or?
I actually have insurance and I pay the bills. My job's at a hospital, but
Okay.
I have done this as long as I can remember. I had my first bug collection in the county fair in 1969 when I was 7. I met Tim Cachette as well, who was the entomologist at the Illinois State
We can walk and talk.
in 1969. He came there in May and I met him in August, and I've done this ever since.
Okay, and you're from Illinois?
I'm from Illinois, central Illinois, little town called Athens.
Okay. What's the Prairie situation up in Illinois? Sad. Is it worse than Missouri?
Absolutely.
Really?
I was astonished at how much prairie you guys have.
There's a creek here, but it's empty. So.
We have about 4,000 acres total of good prairie in Illinois. And you guys have about 80,000 acres.
Why do you think that Illinois, because there was a lot of prairie in Illinois.
Oh God, yeah, it was 21 million acres of prairie.
That's more than Missouri. Why do you think Missouri is preserved more than Illinois?
Because Illinois' ground was much more farmable.
Okay.
And that's what happened to it. The only places left are places that they couldn't farm. Too steep, too rocky, too sandy. And they tried to restore some areas. And even of that 4,000 that there was, that was from natural heritage searches 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some of that's gone now too.
Is there like an MDC equivalent in Illinois that has, prairie habitat
There is. We've got the Department of Natural Resources, and there's some very good people in with that. But so many times their hands are tied on what they can do.
Are there many private landowners, like people like us, who...
There are a few foundations. Friends of the Sangamon Valley, they're real good. There are a few landowners that protect areas, but nobody's got big blocks of land.
Mm-hmm.
And it tends to be separated by way too far for things to move around. You may have a really nice, 50 or 100 acre patch, but it may be 50 or 100 miles before you find the next one.
Yeah.
And for a long time in Illinois, we had an abundance of railroads. And that's where some of the best prairie was.
Uh-huh.
But in the last 40 years, we've lost a lot of that. And they've either just been farmed or turned into bike trails.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of lose the prairie component of it, even when they save it for something. People don't want to ride their bike in the hot sun all day, so they tend to let trees grow up in them.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
And that's what they stay on for the rest of the season. They bore out that long, skinny.
Well, I'll be a son of a gun.
Yeah.
I'll try to look. I mean, it's not hard to find yam in that
I was
part of the
asking
world.
about the yam.
Yeah.
That if we found a good patch of it, it would be good for us to look for marginidans. Yeah.
Well, I'll keep my eye open for the wild yam and kind of keep a note for you guys. But yeah, there's no way I'll find the larva. So
Plus for Jim, he
I
was a
haven't
little
yet either.
he was a little forlorn that he didn't find one yet. So we got to cheer him up.
Yeah. That is the hardest larva of all of them I've seen to find. I mean, even when you find it and know it's probably there, it's hard to get.
It is tough. Yeah.
And I got to credit Tony for that one. If he hadn't spent years trying to figure out what that fed
how in the
on,
world do you guys
nobody ever
track
knew.
down a larva?
That one.
Okay, first of all, if you can't really ID them until you know what the larva looks like, how do you even know to look for this thing has got a secret host plant out there that I need to try to figure out somehow?
Well, we knew the species. No, the species has been known for a long time, but no one knew what it ate. And it's a widespread species, and they're big.
And it's distinctive. I mean, you can identify it. There's things that
Yeah.
it looks like, but once you know them, you can tell what it is.
And all the plants like this had been ruled out, so people started thinking it was boring way up in trees, in the terminal twigs of trees. But even that was a stretch, because the larva doesn't look like it would be in the tree. It looks like it would be subterranean. See how these eryngii larvae have all those stripes on them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one is almost colorless. It's kind of pale orange, brown looking. So we ended up, I was with Jim out in Illinois. We caught a female, and we got eggs from her, and we saw what the larva looked like. That was the start.
Huh.
And then we started,
And we reared those on potatoes and carrots.
yeah.
Yeah, for whatever they'll eat in the wild, most of the time you can get them to take one or the other. So we just took red potato, sliced it in half, poked holes in it with a toothpick, and hoped for the best, basically. And we got a few of them to go through. So we knew what it looked like.
And then I was down in North Carolina, a place called Mount Jefferson, a few times looking for it, because I catch a lot of them there. And a fellow did a master's thesis on the plant life of Mount Jefferson. And I just went through, I said, it's got to be on this list. I went through plant by plant, and I had never seen yam before. So I had some eggs that overwintered. I took the yam shoots in April and put the newly hatched larva on the yam shoot under my dissecting scope at home, and it bored into it. And then we had to find one in the wild, which is extremely hard. Yeah. So it was a process, but
Yeah, it's
took-
kind of amazing.
it
I
took
don't know
9
how
years.
long
9 years for me to
that it
figure
would have
that
ever
out.
been before somebody ever figured that out if it wasn't for what he did.
Huh.
And we pretty well finished off what's left. There's a couple we don't know what they feed on.
There's not many left of Papaipema that we don't know what they do.
Between he and I, we finished it off.
Yeah. I didn't mean to photobomb. I didn't know you were filming him back there when I walked
Oh,
by.
it's okay. No, this is totally casual. I do need a cinematic moment where you guys find a larva though.
Oh, here's the. No, sorry. Just saw the brown plant leaf.
I wish I would have had the camera when you found that one back in our prairie.
Well, we could have set that up. But... I'm getting out of the Eryngium here. Back into the colony.
Do you think this prairie is close enough to ours that the moths would be able to move back and forth?
I
Or
think eventually. I don't know that they would do it you know, in the next year or two, but probably within
You got
a
something,
few
Paul?
years they'd find it.
Oh, more plants.
More Eryngium.
All right. The females fly farther than the males. The males are more homebodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the females will lay a few eggs, and then it's a common pattern in Lepidoptera that they'll disperse and try to find other habitats. And those are the ones that will colonize new places. Because they'll just keep flying across this until they find what they like.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they must have really good detection of what they need, because obviously there's one Papaipema that feeds on mayapple, and you know, by September you can't even find a mayapple.
Mm-hmm.
She can find those dead leaves and tuck those eggs in them.
There's a praying mantis right there.
Oh yeah.
That's the only thing I would worry about this one is if it seems like this little 48.
Okay, a pretty young one, pretty new.
Is this different from other cicadas?
Yeah, they're only found out here. They're supposedly they feed on the silphiums. Ibison's dorsata, last I knew. Unless they put it in some other genus. Kind of a small one. They get a lot of this in male too. They get a lot bigger. The white mark down its abdomen is pretty diagnostic for this. In fact, all those white marks.
You ever get horse guards out here?
Horse star.
Horse guard?
I don't know what that is.
It's a solitary nesting bee that feeds on banded flies. And they'll fly around and just hang here with you as you walk through the prairie. Almost sounds like something that's going to sting you. And they're just watching for us to bandit so they can grab it.
Oh, wow. Most people would be swatting at them.
So I don't know if we should be looking on top of the hill or at the bottom of the hill. There's a lot of cornflowers up there, but I don't know. It's drier. I don't know where to look. Well, shoot, yes, he's pretty worn. Yeah, he's
Yeah, looks like a male.
It's got a Papaipema baptisiae larva in it.
Oh, that's cool.
See all that frass on the ground there?
Oh yeah, all the brown stuff.
Yeah, and that, I noticed it just because it had fallen over. Now some of the frass is pretty fresh.
That's probably
How moist that is, and he's
Yeah.
going to be down in the root somewhere.
halfway to China.
Yeah. Let's see how. I don't know how deep the roots are on this type of indigo. There he is.
Oh
Come on
Here
out
he
of there, little
comes.
buddy.
Here you go. There's your buddy.
And you can tell them from eryngii because that central stripe that goes right up the back goes through that dark area. See that?
Eryngium doesn't.
And eryngii just has a dark area there with no stripe that goes through it.
Oh, look, he stops. Oh, they're taking pictures.
This is a common and widespread species in the east. Yeah,
I can have my caterpillars and stuff do. They just keep moving around all the time. So.
this one's
Like,
cooperative.
hold still.
I was cozy in my burrow, and then all of a sudden,
You guys get Argyle sweater over here.
Get what?
Argyle sweater, the cartoon.
Yeah, yeah.
There was one the other day. My sister, I love it. Some of them I can't figure out, but one of them, she got me a calendar and shows this dead mayfly. And this guy's reading his book as a mayfly said, Henry, I just found out that smoking one cigarette takes 11 minutes off your life. That's not good if you're a mayfly.
I miss the far side.
Oh, I do too. They don't even make the calendars anymore.
he had a little bit of a.
And you look around a few fronds and you see where something has taken it and folded it like that and kind of sewed it together with silk.
Mm-hmm.
If you open that up, there's generally a larva in that. And it's usually a butterfly called the Bice's skipper, which should be, I mean, Paul and I have found larvae of those things about everywhere we went out here. But they're a neat little skipper. They're going by what they've read from the guys before. And the guys 100 years ago that were writing about them were just giving it their best guess. That's what they thought they did.
I see a lot of people talking about like soil microbial structure.
Yeah.
What?
That doesn't seem to be an issue with these guys as far as we know. Which is why they go into a restoration in places. We've never really tried to start them where we knew they weren't historically. And that needs to be done before you can rule that out and say, oh, they're not taken here. But my guess is as long as there's cover and the food plant, I think they can probably tolerate it. And they make it sound so rare. It's so rare because nobody looked for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? The minute I started looking, we were finding it. And all the people before did was run bucket traps with a light on it. Well, that's just not very effective for them.
Well, when did they find out that Rattlesnake Master was the host?
1918.
Okay, so
I've got the paperwork from the guys. A guy named Wyatt, Alexander K. Wyatt from Chicago. He was a Chicago area collector. I've got 4 volumes of books at home that he did just for himself, that thick, of all the stuff that he reared, but he particularly liked Papaipema. And he'd go out and search for them and find what he found. Well, he found one on Eryngium up in Chicago back in I think it was 13 or 14. Reared it out, sent one of the adults to a guy named Henry Bird, who was still like the Grandmaster of Papaipemas ever. He described half of them that are known. And sent it to Henry Bird, and Henry said, well, this is new. I mean, the genitalia of this thing is so bizarrely different from closely related species that, that cinched it right away. So Bird came out in about 1916, I think, with a guy named Elam Beer and this Alexander Wyatt. And they took him to where they found it. They found larvae, and he was going to call it Wyatt eye since Wyatt discovered it.
Mm.
And Wyatt said, no, he says, why don't you name it after that plant? So that's how it became named eryngii, or it would have been Wyatt eye.
Would you consider yourself a contemporary Papaipema Grandmaster?
I would have loved to have met him. He spent more years than I did doing it, and a lot more when there was pristine habitat. And I've learned from what he published. He published a ton of papers, and I've got them all. And I guess a contemporary would be appropriate, but I still look up to him.
Yeah.
Always will. So. Him and the current person who's considered that, Eric Quinter, who's out in New York. He and I back 30 years ago were together a lot out in the field looking for stuff. In fact, just a couple of years ago, one that we were looking for then, trying to figure out that
Okay.
You're number 2 and he's number 1.
All right, can you explain this? What this
Yeah,
is?
so this is a larva that bores in plants. This is Papaipema baptisiae. The reason it's called that is it was named that because its larva feeds in baptisia, different species of indigo. It also bores in dogbane.
So this is not the rattlesnake master one.
This is not.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I've got one that.
This is just one of those down in a carrot.
Oh, okay.
Wear 'em out.
Yeah.
See, he's got down
I
there.
tried to get back and open the door, and then when I
New
opened the door, I
species
couldn't see
number
the door. I was
5.
like, I don't know where he must have stuffed this up, but I thought it was in the truck somewhere. So.
Yeah.
That's
So-
precious cargo right there.
Yeah.
There was a fishing show on
Well,
TV.
sorry, bitch.
All right.
Okay. Probably didn't like this bright sunlight. You see him okay in there?
Yeah, I think so.
This is Papaipema eryngii. This is a larva.
My camera just, this camera's overheating. It can't handle the heat.
Look up.